Hi there, my name's Adrian Whitehead. I'm one of the directors at CACE, which is Council on Community Action in the Climate Emergency. Uh, we ran a series of community and council education sessions in early Feb in 2021, and this is a recording of one we did on the 12th of February 21. It's designed to educate councillors a bit about how they can get climate emergency elements in their council plans, and that's the focus of the talk. Um, this is a recording of it, and I've deleted some of the bits that were a little bit extraneous, like the start and a couple of other bits in the middle, and added a tiny bit of detail just to help explain some of the points we're making a little clearer. So um, I'll now kick on to the talk and hope you enjoy it. Doing a bit of a talk for about 35 minutes, covering a little bit of the history and why action by councils is important for climate change, and climate change basics, just a little touching on what climate change is and why it's quite serious. I'll be talking about getting your climate emergency into your council plan, and we'll be talking about just a little bit about responding to common objections from councillors that we often hear, because you'll probably need to work with other councillors to get your material through, and talk about finally about what the climate emergency mobilisation is and why that's important as well. So just a little bit of history. This whole council focus on getting councils to act in an emergency manner in climate change started in 2013 by a group called Save the Planet, where myself and a range of other people who are very frustrated with the lack of action by state and federal governments, particularly when compared to the highs of the sort of Kevin 07 era. It was really difficult to get progress around climate change, and we thought councils could actually play a really significant role. And we started campaigning on councils with a view to getting them to focus on climate change and focus on the climate emergency. And a lot of that campaigning was done in Darebin. And we had our first success in Darebin when in 2016, as the first motion of the new council, we got Darebin to be the first government in the world to acknowledge a climate emergency. And there's all the councillors there. Sorry if you see me do the admin as well at the same time, but there's all the councillors. They're a nice bunch of people. They were the first government in the world to acknowledge that we're facing a climate emergency. And since then, what we've seen is a bit of a rise in the number of climate change. So you can possibly not quite see the dates down the bottom. I'm not sure if that pops up on yours, but it took 2 years after the first two declarations, and then a third and fourth and fifth and sixth, until it started taking off. So things don't kick off straight away. But the important thing is, because of the actions of a single council here in North Melbourne, we now have over 1,800 councils and governments around the world who have declared or acknowledged a climate emergency, and there's a bit of a map where they all are. Some are entire countries, including ones even the EU. And so just the action of one council within a couple of years changed global discourse. So it changed it from climate change, global warming, to the climate emergency or the climate crisis. And it's made a lot of people take stronger actions and understand things like fires and floods and storms in that sort of context of emergency and crisis as well. So if you're interested in just the dynamics of movement building, there's a really great YouTube video by Derek Sivers on how to start a movement. It's about using the analogy of people dancing in a festival. How does a dancing crowd form? And the key thing is, when I've paused that video at the key moment, when in a couple of seconds from now, there's about 200 people dancing. And really, it's the first 6 or so people you need to sort of follow. And we found the same process within councils. And it's quite important to think as councils. So every time you take a leadership position on something, you're helping a new activity or a new norm to be established and breaking business as usual models. But it does take a few of you to get it going. In Victoria, we've got 32 out of the 79 councils have declared. That's 40%. And if we look at a sort of standard graph of adoption of technology or ideas, we're not over that hump in the middle. We're up in the early majority phase. And every sort of idea or new piece of technology goes through this sort of process. We don't worry about those at the far end, the laggards or the late majority, but we've got to capture that sort of early majority and get that majority to bring all the Conservatives on side. So we're coming up that blue hill at the moment around the climate emergency and action at councils, but what we haven't got is anyone doing the climate emergency thing yet. So we're right down at the tip in terms of full mobilisation around innovation. So that's something we'll talk about at the end. Talking about how bad global warming is, just a bit of a refresher on that. We would all understand, you would have all heard that we don't want to go above 2 degrees. Once you go above 2 degrees, climate gets quite serious. Above 3 and 4 degrees, society starts to unravel. Sadly, the global commitments that we've got from the Paris agreements put us on a track to 3 degrees or more. And what they're actually going to implement of those commitments are one thing, but what they're actually implementing is pushing us up to about a 4-degree warming at some point. If we wanted to go to 2 degrees, we would have to follow this trajectory down, and to give us a good chance of doing it, we'd have to hit 0 before 2045. So not 2050, but somewhere between 2045, and then we have to go negative. We've got to draw down those emissions. If we wanted to do it in a way that maximized human safety and ecological preservation, we would do it as fast as possible, and that's about 10 years. So just again about global warming, we're about 1.1 degrees of warming now. If you haven't seen these before, this is a new phenomenon. It's a climate-based phenomenon. It's huge craters that are appearing in the Arctic tundra, formerly frozen permafrost, is starting to melt across a huge area. The bacteria get active, they degrade the biomass in there, and they turn it into methane, and the methane explodes. So they were seen about 5 years ago, and there's now lots and lots of them. At 1.1 degrees, we're seeing these sort of new phenomena around the world. The Great Barrier Reef will die unless we create a global cooling. So it's currently bleaching faster than it can heal. So if we wanted to save the Great Barrier Reef, we'd have to enact a global cooling now. And at 1.1 degrees, if we manage to stabilize that over a long period and not go above it, even then we'd see 1 to 4 meter sea level rise by the end of the century. And that would remove a lot of our Pacific islands, a lot of Bangladesh, a lot of low-lying suburbs and cities around the world. So, and also most of our ecology can't withstand over the longer term a 1.1 degrees temperature rise. So just putting it a bit visually there, you can see all that dark redder colors will be drowned by the end of the century, most likely. It could even be worse than 4 meters, but that's the likely scenario. And people who are in Bangladesh will be trapped, and that's the border fence that India has put up around them, which are patrolled by armed guards. So it's not a very pretty picture. So the bottom line is, if we want to act on climate change, we want to do what the concept is maximum protection, which would help us all around the world, including ourselves. We really want to go to zero emissions in all sectors as fast as possible, not leave out agriculture, forestry or land, etc. We want to draw down those past emissions, and we need to look at options for immediate cooling. The detail around that's probably a bit big for this talk. So we just want to have a look at it from a different perspective. Talk about another emergency. Just as an analogy for climate change, that's a tsunami coming. It's 2004, and you could think of climate change as a slow-moving tsunami coming towards us, but a very slow-moving tsunami. And there's one person's walking to the right, just wants to live life as normal, has a vague idea something's going on. One person's looking at it all confused, and the person in the middle is actually racing out to save their family. So the world's sort of mixed up in between those people. The vast majority are either trying to understand it or trying to ignore it. What we should all be doing right now, this is how bad it is, given all of the stuff I talked about, is everyone should be doing their best to stop it. But the good news is, the really good news is, that we have all of the technical solutions we need, well, almost all of them. We've got zero emissions energy, we can build 100% renewable energy grids, we've got zero emission transport options for surface transport, we have negative emission agriculture, we can replant our forests and grasslands and other ecosystems, and that's all been documented by organisations such as Beyond Zero Emissions that focuses on Australia. They're the first people in the world to do emergency speed transition for a nation's energy grid to 100% renewables. And Drawdown is an American organisation that looks at solutions around the world. And the only two things we don't have are zero emissions flight. Not that many people are flying at the moment because of COVID, and negative emissions concrete. We've got low emissions concrete. You can get that quite easily, but there's the possibility of getting negative emissions concrete at some point in the near future. So just to bring us back to what we're talking about that red thing there in the middle, your council plan, and how we're going to get climate action in your council plans. So what I'm going to do is I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over to Dale, and Dale's going to have a chat about how you can take different actions, different ideas, and get them embedded in your council plan.
So for those that don't know me or haven't met me before, my name's Dale Martin. I was a former councillor in the city of Moreland. I was a councillor there from 2016 to 2020. And one of the things that I did over my last year of council was to essentially document everything that we had done, everything that I had learnt in relation to the climate emergency over the 4 years. I documented that into a toolkit for others to use and to learn from, basically. I knew I wasn't running again, and I, you know, it's an awful lot of work being a councillor, and I wanted to make sure that at least some other people could benefit from the hard work that we put in, especially in Moreland. A little bit about me. So I think we voted on about 1,300 reports as a council, and I was part of that 1,300 reports. I made about 100 amendments to those 1,300 reports. Of that, probably 95% was related to climate action or the climate emergency. So I had a very, very strong focus on that through my entire term. I put forward about 30 notices of motion also to kick off new policies, new ideas. And we didn't have a voting majority on council, so a lot of it did require negotiation to pass. And I think it's really key for councillors. The best outcomes that you get on council is when you work together, even if it is compromising a little bit sometimes. I think really all councillors come at this role with the best of intentions, and so I think it's about bringing everyone on the journey. And I really do hope that this toolkit really does help people on that journey. Also, as well, I started a campaign a few years ago called Plastic Bag Free Victoria. And so we were successful in lobbying the state government and creating a bit of a groundswell across LGAs as well. And a lot of the tactics that I learnt in that I've included also in this toolkit. So it's a bit of a combination of a few things. So the toolkit, really what I've done is I really wanted to make the political process accessible, not just for councillors, and I know you know, there's a huge amount of you know, resource sharing between councils and ideas generation between councils, but I found that over the term I had a lot of community members sort of lobbying me for things that were really state or federal issues, and I really wanted to highlight that in the toolkit to make it really clear what local government's responsible for, and to really look at who the decision makers are in local government, what are the key documents, and again, this is for the community to really understand, well, what are the documents that influence change? Is it calling up your local councillor and yelling at them on the phone? Is that going to actually enact change? Is getting into an argument with somebody on social media, is that going to enact any change? Or is it actually making submissions, talking to your councillors, amending reports, strategies? With the toolkit as well, I've got specific and measurable recommendations, all at the local government level. There's nothing in this toolkit which is set at the other levels. I really wanted to focus in on our level of government. And also in there, there's a lot of examples as to how you might enact that, especially as a councillor. So there's sort of combination of the document. The intro is probably more for community, and then the actual actions are probably more for councillors. So really the need to develop this is that I found I was incredibly time poor the entire council term. Working full time, I had no time to be across everything, and I relied really heavily on either officers for advice or ideas or actions that had been implemented elsewhere at other councils. What I started to do later on in my term was I started to take ideas from other jurisdictions elsewhere in Australia and even internationally, and we put forward those as notices of motion. Naturally, every council is different. Every council has different budgets. And so a lot of the indicators in here are sort of universal indicators. They're not specific to certain budgets. And also, you know, the system's complex. And especially if you've made a climate emergency declaration, or even if you haven't and you're looking for things to do, you can sometimes get a bit paralyzed with the choice and the amount of things that you could get stuck into. So I really wanted to document all of them, all of the ones that I've found that are working in Australia anyway. So I wanted to bring it back to the council plan because really this toolkit and why we're talking tonight is that your council plans are coming up. If you haven't already been asked for priorities from your officers, I would definitely get in touch and maybe even suggest some priorities for them. Really, it comes down to there's a few ways that different councils operate. Sometimes if you have a particularly strong CEO and executive, they may actually provide you a draft, give you a small window to change some things, and then put it out to community consultation. Otherwise, in some of the other councils that I've seen, you'll have councillors that will put forward all of their priorities, and then the officers will pull that together, and it will really be driven by the councillors. So you have a couple of opportunities to amend the council plan. So obviously feeding in the priorities. Once the draft goes out, you'll have the opportunity to vote on it, make amendments on the night if you wish. That will go out to the community. You'll get community feedback, and then it'll come back for the final adoption. There, you'll also have another opportunity to make amendments if you see fit. And I think it's really important that if you do think that there's areas that you should be more ambitious on, definitely try and get that early in the draft and hear what your community has to say about it, because you may be surprised about how much support there is in the community for these actions. So going on from that, really wanted to talk about, well, what do I include? Here is on a page a summarized version of the toolkit and a list of all of the ideas, the policies, the actions that you can take as councillors. I'm not going to go through them all. You can download the toolkit for free. It's from lgcet.com and it has all of these. But really, as a councillor, you should be setting the strategic direction, but you can also go that next step and actually say, well, I want us to call for a review of the advocacy plan or the fleet policy or planning scheme amendments. You know, I could look at local laws, I could look at our risk management, our procurement. You know, there are a huge raft of issues and areas that you can look at that all benefit the community when it comes to climate action. And I think also something that's really important and something that gets a bit of pushback is, oh no, we have to declare a climate emergency, and then what will happen is it's going to cost us an arm and a leg. And really, I can't strongly enough emphasize that the environmental, the social, the economic benefits of a lot of these actions are so heavily interrelated that you may find that the best environmental decision actually saves you the most money. And I really would encourage people to talk with their officers and really explore those things in more detail, because it was something that we found time and time again that you know, we were putting money into, say, things like environmental upgrade agreements that were then reducing people's power bills, and then they were spending that money in the local community, for example. You know, there's a huge raft of issues, even, you know, waste management, especially with the landfill levy going up. You know, there is a huge opportunity for greater source separation. And so, you know, with that, if you're able to do greater source separation, then you're gonna pass through less cost to your residents. And so, you know, they're just a couple of examples in there that you can take. Again, just how to read the toolkit. It just goes through each of the areas. So there's 7 areas that you can look at with a little bit of a blurb. It talks about the recommended actions. So there's sort of a minimum standard or a minimum action that you can take, which is 1 star, all the way through to you know, best practice, which is 3 stars. It talks about who can enact it, which documents you need to look at, what method you might use as a councillor, whether it's a notice of motion, an amendment to a plan, and then also it provides an example on each page, and that's exact wording that I used or I have seen used at a council over the last 4 years. And so I'll just wind it up there because I know we've got lots more to chat about. But if you want to get in touch with me, obviously you can reach out through Adrian and through CACE, but also if you want to get in touch with me directly, you can send me an email to info@lgcet.com and or you can follow us on social media. We've had a really great response so far with the toolkit. We've almost hit 3,000 downloads, which has been really great, seeing as the toolkit's only been out for 3.5 months. And I've spoken with a lot of officers, a lot of councillors as well. So if you haven't already had a read of it, please take the time, download it. You might even want to just get a highlighter out, go through it and highlight which areas your council can do a little bit more in. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dale. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. All right, so so Dale was talking about all the different things you can do. We sent that, you may have read the first email we sent. We sent that first email out with that attachment as a PDF. There was a couple of councils that had 10 megabyte limits on their council emails, so they didn't get through, but you can always download it, and we'll put it in the link in the discussion so you can click on it a little bit later when we're asking questions. But one of the things you're going to have to do is deal with your council and other councillors. And some of the things that we get quite regularly at CACE is a series of basic things that stop people wanting to act. So I'll just sort of quickly cover them and get you thinking about them. So one of them, Dale mentioned it pretty much earlier, was that if a council declares a climate emergency, will we have to follow it up and become financially liable, etc.? Well, the reality is the legal opinions around this, and there's a couple of people doing, or one person in particular has been giving a lot of advice to councils, is that you are liable now for your decisions around climate change. And I'm sure, and currently in the 2020 Victorian version of the legislation, it explicitly talks about councils requiring to act around climate mitigation and adaptation. One thing we get occasionally is councils are doing everything they can, and that's not really the case. Dale mentioned in the previous talks that no single council is doing everything in his list. So there's still, even the best councils, a lot of the bigger councils such as Melbourne and Sydney often pride themselves on being leaders, and they often are, but they're still not doing everything that's in Dale's list. The community wants to stick to basic services, and that's fine. You can gear your climate change responses to the basic services, how you deliver basic things like your rubbish collection can be linked to climate change, how you design your transport systems and service roads and put in bike facilities, etc., can all be linked to climate change. And your rates can be linked to climate change. So a whole range of options such as eco loans to your community members and getting them to pay back that through their rates. There's all sorts of things you can do just with the basics to respond to climate change. Climate emergency is the business of state, federal governments, not councils. Well, is the business of everyone. It's explicitly in the legislation that it's now the business of councils. And councils are the closest level of government to community, so it should be. And they also have a role in emergency response, as you'd all know. And climate emergency declaration would be virtue signalling. Well, it could be virtue signalling if you're going out there and not doing something behind it. Not all councils are going to have the big amounts of money to do really big projects. You can do small projects. It's important to do something. What's important is not to make a declaration or say you're doing climate emergency actions and then go and do something like London did, which was 2 weeks or 3 weeks after they declared, go and support the expansion of a major airport. That's sort of the thing that's doesn't go down that well. In terms of communicating with your fellow councillors and even your community, just remember that councils might have different values than you do. And so you need to communicate in their value set, not your value set. So Do they care about people? Are they interested in the lowest socioeconomic element of your community and looking after them? Or are they looking after the rich business people or whatever? Anything in between, doesn't really matter. Find out what they care about. Are they primarily interested in themselves? Are they interested in their place in history? And it goes on and on and on. So you just really need to get your messages around what they care about, and work out how climate will resonate with your community. Is it working to help the most disadvantaged by encouraging retrofits of really poor rentals? Is it responding to fire risk or drought in your area, etc.? So you always look at how you're taking your climate emergency action and fitting it in a way that's going to resonate, and what projects and activities will resonate with your community, and also convince them that it's meaningful and solvable, because some people just don't understand that, one, we can solve it, and two, that the action of council is important. And I tried to cover that at the start. So we cover this all on our website at CACE, and it's got a lot of information around value-based communication. We set that up for the community members, but it could also help councillors if you've never studied that sort of stuff. There's lots of links and YouTube videos and things you could look at. So moving on from sort of talking to people and thinking about where to for here, what might the next steps be? Well, if you're one of the 47 councils who haven't declared, there's all the ones that have, so there's quite a lot that haven't. We've got a section on the CACE website. It's up here under a guide for councils, motions to declare a climate emergency. It gives you a guide to writing strong motions, weak motions, depending on the level of support for your in your council or with your fellow councillors. If you're getting pushback at the moment for a declaration, it might be worth trading not going for a declaration at the moment for better outcomes than going for a declaration later in your term. We always recommend for councillors that haven't declared, even if you don't have a majority or are going to lose, to still put the motion and get it recorded as to which way those councillors vote, because at some point in the future, people will look back at that and it might influence something like a person's political career or their run at council next time. If you have declared, you can go the whole hog and do something like Hepburn's done, where they've basically paid for a really deep analysis of their entire community's emissions, and you can see that at www.znet.org. So it's a fantastic piece of work, but then you've got to link in a whole range of things to reduce those emissions as well. And and it's the sort of work that Dale's got in his piece of work that you can use. And what's sort of the end game? So the end game that CASE wants you guys to think about, if we're actually going to be going for that 2-degree pathway and not going into 3-4 degrees of warming, which will be social chaos, pretty much every level of government will be in emergency mode at some stage. And the sooner we're in emergency mode working towards zero emissions and then drawdown and cooling the planet, the easier the task will be and the less the impact is going to be. So councils are going to end up in what we call emergency mode. And that pretty much means it's the #1 priority of council outside the delivery of the core services. So again, on the CASE website, if you want to understand about what emergency mode is, that's, for most of you, it's probably a bit further down the track, but we have it under Guide for Councils again and entering emergency mode. So just read that section. It's got lots of useful information there. And I'll just flash this up. I'm not going to go through it. We don't have time, but we've got an example of, and I'm happy to share this presentation if people want to look at this. You know, what's the difference between a emergency versus a non-emergency response? So yeah. So climate emergency at a glance, just unpacking this emergency response, the full emergency response again. The first step is the acknowledgement. There's a lot you can do in the early phase, but key things are executive buy-in. If you don't have your executive and your CEO supporting it, and it has to be obviously in the council plan, but you're not going to get the work you need done. It needs to be a communications priority. It needs to include community mobilisation. It needs to include a whole of council review and a budgeting exercise. And again, as I said, it's the #1 priority outside of normal service delivery. Now, not many councils are going to be ready to go for a full emergency mobilisation. If that was to happen, they would need a majority of councils who want to mobilise. They need a CEO who's willing to back it and go beyond business as usual. They need climate and communication teams willing to give it their all to get their community on board. And you need a functioning council. Some councils are just not all that functioning at a whole series of levels, and you need a strong community campaign to back them in. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to emergency mobilisation. We've got one council in Australia and that we know of that's working towards this at the moment. What would it look like? Well, a lot of councils have done an emergency sort of response to COVID. Here's Yarra's homepage. This snapshot was taken 2 days ago. About 90% of the first thing you see is all COVID. So there's a permanent banner, there's a major menu item, there's a feature on outdoor dining, and councils like Darebin have combined this sort of messaging with, $10 million worth of funding and a communication direct mail out to their every member of the community, et cetera, or every household. So that's the sort of thing at a basic level. If you're treating climate change as an emergency, it's giving it the priority that it deserves. And the COVID response is something similar that we're looking for. And just the final note that I'd like to make is just remember the CEO works for you and that you were elected by the community and not them. So some of the difficulty I've had in getting climate stuff through councils has stemmed directly from the CEO, who's been quite opposed to it. So quite a number of CEOs are very risk adverse and just can't seem to get their head around possibilities that are incredibly positive. So hi, thanks again for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. So just a quick recap, we sort of covered 3 basic topics in this talk. We looked at the climate change basics, how bad it is. We looked at the program of actions and how you can use the work that Dale Martin's put together and put that into your council plan when you're picking which particular projects that you're going to be looking at or using in your council. And the third section was sort of an introductory explanation around climate emergency mobilisation for council. So that final bit is where we want all councils to get to. It's the level of action that you would be implementing around climate change if you wanted to actually give your kids the best chance of surviving and avoiding a climate catastrophe. And it's going to take a lot of work for us to get there, for people to understand that this is 1, necessary, and 2, appropriate, and 3, the responsibility of councils as well. So after this, I'll just play the questions that were asked on this particular session that we ran back on the 12th of February. And again, hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. So for those that can't see it, so Jack's asked a question around, are you thinking of updating it in the with the community vision as a key document to drive action? And it's a good question. I think as far as the toolkit goes, it was my first crack at it. So there's a couple of things that have come up since, which I'll be revising and I'll be updating it. I'm kind of hoping that I won't have to update the toolkit too much more before everyone just does it. That'd be nice. But I think with the vision statement or the community vision in particular, the reason why I didn't include it was because not every council does a community vision, and so I could be wrong here, but I don't think that there's any legislative requirement for community vision, but there is for the council plan. So I really wanted to stick to things that were mandated, that universally every council was going to go off and do. But it's an excellent suggestion, and I definitely think if you can influence the community vision statement or the community vision document. Okay, fantastic. So there you go. I'll be updating the toolkit with that one going forward. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think you really should be trying for. All documents that you can get any level of influence in, even if you do happen to miss the community vision, the council plan, and you just end up being able to influence the the various strategies that come before you. That's still far better than just trying to go at it alone and put notices of motion forward that don't end up getting support.
Yeah, Mandy.
Yes, hi Adrian, and thanks very much for your work and your presentation. Thanks to you too, Dale. It's awesome. Mandy Urey from East Gippsland Shire Council, and you'd think we'd be lining up to declare an emergency, wouldn't you, down here? But I'm not sure that we are yet. It's been requested of our council once and it was knocked back. That was the previous council. But you know, to council's credit, the officers are, you know, travelling along and doing what they can, and that's quite considerable, to be honest. But we're going to look at this again. We're being asked by various groups in the community to declare a climate emergency. But from what I'm gathering from, I'm not sure where the CEO is, how strong, you know, how much he would be behind it. But I reckon a number of our GMs and other managers are probably not convinced. So I'm thinking that maybe an education thing might be best, perhaps for the whole of council first before going into the community. Have you got any thoughts about that, and who would be good to present to a council group?
Yeah, so we have done presentations to councillors and senior management.
Yeah.
Usually 30 minutes is a little tight, but we can do it in the 30-minute window if that's all we've got. Probably 45 or an hour is better. We usually use a basic format of a slightly more substantial shock and awe session where we talk about how bad it is, and we get there's a person called David Spratt who's a specialist in the how bad climate change is talk, and it usually you know, it can leave people a bit stunned. So we immediately follow up with a package showing that all the key solutions are in place and thought out and costed and ready to be rolled off, so we can actually save ourselves. It's very important to pair those two. And then we'd probably Dale's work's just come online, so part of the idea would be to get Dale down and, you know, present a range of options that we can do. And we often have someone talking about the importance of you know, getting communication out to the public and stuff. So we're very happy to do that for you. Probably not. A lot of organisations could do it, but a lot of organisations, their work is framed in the sort of traditional 2050 sort of slow climate response, that sort of thing. So there's not many people who talk in the same way that we do. So
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
also as well, because the toolkit is so fresh off the press. I mean, one of the things that you can do, rather than sort of getting me to come down and talk through everything where you might have already done 20, 30, 40% of the toolkit anyway, you could always just call for a report from officers to identify maybe a gap analysis, something of the like. And then, you know, I can more than happily come along and we can really drill down into certain areas. And you might find that, you know, and every council's different. I found when I first started at Moreland, we didn't even have any risk management framework. So I couldn't implement environmental management systems because there wasn't even a risk framework to go with. Same with things like the fleet policy. I mean, I found it hadn't been reviewed. It was in draft format, hadn't been reviewed for 11 years. You know, so there's things that you'll find that you know, you could give a little bit of special attention to early on.
Yep. Terrific. Thank
yeah,
you.
and I've done a little bit of work in East Gippsland and was yeah, I found your officers down there quite great, so it was good.
Quite great. Yeah,
Yes,
in the right department there.
Yes.
They are. They are quite great, Adrian. Yep, that's true. Thanks.
Someone else? Another question? Gavin? Or sorry, and then we'll go Gavin and Mike.
Okay. I'm in a rural shire where the main industry is agriculture. And I specifically want to sort of try and get more carbon into the soil, reduce emissions to do with agriculture, and encourage regenerative agriculture and things like that. So I'm putting that up as a into the council plan, hopefully accepted. But when it actually comes down to making it work in practice, I'm going to need help and guidance about the best way to approach it and to make it, you know, something that farmers will actually adopt.
Yep.
Encourage them.
So there's my recommendation for that is to get farmers groups to talk to farmers. There's a brilliant young speaker who lives on in South Australia who's part of, I think, Farmers for Climate Action or something like that, and she's excellent, powerful speaker. If you could engage her through the council, pay her to come over, etc., and get her to lead a discussion along with, you know, the range of experts in the way there's a whole series of ways you can build soil carbon, from tillage to short rotation, long rest grazing, etc. My personal favourite is biochar because it's stable, it takes waste organic matter and it puts it in the soil as additionality. Traditional methods of farming management that build soil carbon, because Australia is so hot and dry, take a long period of time before even the testing brings it up above standard variation in the test. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
I looked at it
Maybe I could speak to you a bit later
after.
about, you know,
Sure,
like the
very happy. Not
biochar
tonight, but
equipment
we
and
can have a
things.
chat tomorrow.
Yep.
Would be great.
Okay, that'd be great.
That'd be good.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
I
And
think also, Gavin, I think looking at what strategies the council currently has, I think will help a lot, whether or not you've got land management, biodiversity, food systems, even your organics recycling. I think taking a look and just asking officers to provide a report on all of those things and also the funding behind them. I think one of the things that you might find as well is that they might agree to develop a strategy with you, and then they might only allocate $50,000, or they might not even fully resource it. And so you have to be on the ball with some of these things to ensure that the budget actually meets the level of ambition as well.
At the moment, we're getting a lot of grants to build infrastructure and for intense agriculture, you know, shed farming in big swathe of the Shire, despite Barwon Water telling us that we're going to run out of water by 2029, basically, unless it's augmented, you know.
Yeah, and look, and there are problems even with the the long rest short rotation grazing system. If you calculate methane over the shorter time period when it's actually in the atmosphere, you find that even the best examples are still quite carbon positive in terms of the heating effect. So there is some significant issues, but we can talk about that at some point tomorrow or next week if you want to. Mike, can I throw the mic?
Thanks, Adrian. So I'm at Stonington and we declared a climate emergency 12 months ago, almost to the day, which is exciting. However, nothing has happened since then. Council have developed an action plan and it's gone out to a consultant and it's then going to come back to council, then it's going to go back out to the community, not back out, it'll then go out to the community, then it will come back to council, and they're anticipating at this stage that it won't be until May that it comes to council for the final time. My perspective is that that's just too long, too slow, and I was wondering if you had a perspective or if anyone else here had a perspective on, is that ridiculous that it's going to take that long?
Look, May sounds reasonable to me, to be honest. May this year, yeah. We became a community advisory panel for Darebin, and basically we got thrown into a process that wasted the first year, fooled us into thinking we had a genuine process in the second year. We got to the end of the process where all the recommendations were put forward and they were just rejected by the senior management, and then the committee was disbanded. So we got played hard. And if your officers are genuinely wanting to do it, I would accept May as quite reasonable. Dale, what's your
being a councillor and waiting for things to come to you is excruciatingly slow at times. I mean, I called for reports on some things in year 2 and they didn't even get back to us by the end of year 4, because they were busy off consultants. One thing I'd recommend is if there is an opportunity, bring the resources in-house. It's a lot easier to get updates when they're actual staff members and there's sort of a chain of command and you can get your answers out of your CEO. So if there's opportunity there, definitely try and do that. But I think at this stage, if you're looking at May, it's definitely better than putting it off, bringing somebody, onboarding somebody, and then getting the report at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And I have one other question around, so leading into that, the work is currently being done by the Manager for Environment and Sustainability, and I'm really trying to urge council to look at it from an all of council perspective, because it is. Where do you think it sits? Is it a separate sector? We're also doing a 10-year strategy, and they've kind of tagged it onto the side of environment and sustainability, where I'm saying, no, it actually It's because we're like bubbles. So it's actually a bigger bubble that sits kind of around all of the other smaller bubbles, and that's the way it needs to be addressed. How do you see the action plan sitting in terms of lines of reporting, or who should be the one who drives it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in setting your CEO and executive strong KPIs. The CEO will be responding to the KPIs that you've got in their contract. So if there's nothing that mentions, climate change, environment, even, timely reporting from the CEO's subordinates, there's things there that you can include that you should look at, because it's sort of the CEO heavily sets the organizational culture. And if the CEO and the executive aren't backing you, those silos, they're just going to stay the whole time. And I saw this in my term. There were some areas that we had completely rewritten the procurement strategy, and for a year after that, we were still getting reports in the council chamber, and I was asking the question, sorry, where's the weighting of this? Where's the environment? Where's the social procurement? And the director's signing off on these things, because I know that's not my responsibility. That's finance and procurement, and so you've really got to drill down into the KPIs and get the CEO making that change. And if your CEO is not willing to do it, like Adrian said before, maybe you should think about a new CEO.
I think she will. She's pretty good. Thank you.
So sorry, I just wanted to also say the biggest hurdles we ran into, Darabin, was the CEO, and the CEO just did not want to do it. And in the end, we sat down with the councillors about a year out and said, can you bring in the CEO's, key performance indicators and write this in properly into her indicators? But, two were resigning, two got into political mode, ready for their re-election, and it was sort of all over from a community campaigning's perspective. But to answer that first question, I personally think it should be its own thing, like it should be its own stream, and it should have someone heading the climate emergency response at the top executive level as in charge of it. And unfortunately, what happens, it gets buried and siloed, and also it doesn't get into the comm stream. So I've just done a survey. I'll release the report in a couple of weeks when I sort of tidy it up. But of all the councils that have declared, only 2 in Australia mention it on their front page. One has put it on the bottom of their page, like a acknowledgement of country, which is great. And one council, it's a key process going on at the moment. So it's as an event effectively, or a community consultation process. So everywhere else it's buried. So the comms team's quite critical.
Thanks for that. That's great.
Thanks.
Someone else like a question? Just call out. No, we're all good. So, Trudy, did you have a question, or no? Everyone's good. Okay. So, look, it's just maybe a final couple of points, I suppose, from myself. I'm not sure if you understood what I was trying to get at, that full emergency mobilisation. I think what Mike was talking about is sort of in that direction where climate change is a core business of council, and it's across all areas. And one reason I think that we did a briefing of the senior management executives, the next management's down and the next manager's down, with the sort of an hour-long talk around climate change. And I think it did really well as to the managers, but I don't see, if you're actually taking it seriously, why you wouldn't even educate everyone down to the lollipop men and women, because they're an interface with the community. And I think the reality is that the more people who get a good understanding about how serious climate change is, and there are in fact solutions, it frees up them to get that license within their own workspace to do the best that they can within the freedoms they're given under their particular policies and rules and managers and things. So I think it's a good opportunity. If you can get that into your council processes, that would be great as well. So that's all from me. Dale?
well, I don't know how many of you are new or how many are returning, but my one piece of advice is definitely cut yourself some slack. As councillors, you get work to the bone at times, and I think really, if you can get across some of these things and really try and make inroads in some aspects of council, then you're doing a great job. And I think really trying to focus on the strategic direction is much more beneficial than getting caught in the weeds and being really reactive. So if you get the opportunity, and you probably do right now in setting these big strategic goals, definitely try and be ambitious because now's your opportunity.
Yeah, and I suppose one more final point from me, sorry. Yeah, of all of the acts that you could do, even if you can't declare a climate emergency, it's the community outreach, educating the members of your own community about climate change. If you can get your council to do that, it's great, because it creates a positive feedback loop. The more people council communicates with, the more it goes in the newsletter, the more it's on the website, the more people learn, and then that empowers the community to then get you guys and the council itself to take more action. So you will need to do a few programs. So pick 1, 2, or 3, or whatever and whichever ones resonate best for your community and or yourselves or your council, however it's going to work. But always do the communication side if you can. So thanks very much for coming, everyone. We might do another one later in the year or something for a bit of a catch up, see how you've all gone. And we'll try and get this up as a video, probably on YouTube or something. And feel free to have a look at the website. On the CACE website, it's got the links to Dale website, etc. So, or just jump straight in there and grab that document off Dale's website as well. So thanks, everyone. I'll say good night. Any last? Feel free to contact us as well. We're all quite happy and chatty and all that sort of stuff. So
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Thanks. All right. Have a good night. Bye.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Andrew.